And we're live.
All right, we'll go ahead and call to order here at 6:07. Thanks everybody, and good to have a quick catch up for our first meeting of the year. Why don't we go ahead and do a roll call? I have no idea on Zoom how to do it. Amber, do you want to call them off and they can answer present or here? Does that work?
Sure.
Okay.
Amy Rodnick.
Here.
Jamil Alam.
Here.
Jordan Scott.
Here.
Michael Rhodes.
Here.
Tony Stein.
Here.
Brian Nash.
Here.
And we have Charlie Zeck, our city attorney, also present.
All right, if we do have guests, what's the protocol with Zoom? Do they have to kind of chime in to speak up, or how does like they might at a meeting? How do we do that?
If you're
I don't see any.
calling in, or if you're using your phone to just join in as a guest, you're able to raise your hand.
Okay.
And Jordan, there may even be a way for you to show your participants on the side, and you can see, yeah, there you go, just like that. So raise your hand if you want to speak. If you're calling in, I don't think we have anybody calling in, but it's *9 to raise your hand.
Okay, very good. So we'll remember that for the future. *9 or just raise your hand, and I do have the participants up on my right-hand side. If for some reason I miss in the future or even today, miss a participant, feel free to interrupt and we'll see what we can. Okay, with roll call done, we'll ask if there's any public comments for items not on the agenda. We don't have any visitors. Any from the commission? We have a Kevin.
I'll just say, Jamil asked me before we started the recording how many active permits I have. I've got 101.
Holy moly.
That includes fences and utility permits, but yeah, 101.
Thank you. Any idea if that's a record?
No clue.
Carrie, it's Trump's America. You just gotta say it's the greatest. It's the most ever. We're amazing. It's the most. Well, I'll say this. As we're in items not on our agenda, I just want to thank everybody for being here. I know it's a strange day for our country at the national level, but I'm a true believer that this is the best example of democracy, which are neighbors getting together to figure out how we want to manage ourselves at a local level. And I think it's one of the things I love about our freedoms here in America. My grandparents always said if they were born in Russia and said that had they lived there, everything they had would have been taken from them. And so that I love us exercising our freedoms here to self-govern. So with that said, I will also say, as it's not on the agenda, I don't want to get sideways. Charlie, we did get a resignation letter from Alex Robinette, from Commissionerwoman Alex Robinette. So we are going to have an open space that we'll have to discuss next time. Any other items? All right, hearing none, why don't we go ahead and move on into the consent agenda. There's only one item on it, which is the minutes from our November 4th P&Z meeting. As you recall, we didn't have one in December. So do I have a motion for our consent agenda?
Motion
I so move.
approved. Second.
Okay, I think that was Amy and with the motion to approve, and Jamil with the second.
Yep.
Okay. Any further discussion of effectively approving our minutes from our November 4th meeting?
Actually,
Very
I wasn't present at that meeting, so I should let somebody else make the motion and I should abstain.
Technically, Robert Rules lets you vote on and move on minutes even if you didn't participate.
Okay, well, if you
100%.
say it's okay, then we'll leave it as it is.
I think you as the movement lends a lot of credibility to it, Amy. And so I think it's important that you stay attached. Otherwise, this whole system could fall apart.
Oh, no.
Brian, I saw in here, I was reminded that you were an hour late to the last one, so I'm not sure if you should really be commenting either.
Well,
Again,
not only that, but
the more
Brian,
that
you
you all
refer to it as a,
participate, the more legitimate the process becomes, as evidenced by Commissioner Stein's comment about
well,
my
Brian,
participation.
you referred to it as a system. Do you think you think that's what this is?
Democracy, as Mr. Chairman has spoken of, I think the whole, American way of, truth, justice, neighbors interacting together. I'm feeling really patriotic today, and I thought that was a really great opening to this meeting. Really excited about it. I'll stay over here on mute for a while. How about that? Is that going to be easier?
All right. If no further discussion, why don't we do a roll call vote? Amber, why don't you fire them off? You guys
Amy
want?
Radnick. She raised her hand. Jamil Alam.
The aye or nay?
He raised his hand.
Aye.
Jordan Scott.
Aye.
Michael Rhodes.
Aye.
Tony Stein.
Aye.
Brian Nash. He raised his hand.
All right. We're going to take hand raises as approval. However, for those who want to talk, the trick with, if you're on your computer, the easiest trick is to press the space bar to talk or mute. Well, I guess it just works for talking. If I'm muted and I press the space bar, it will sort of temporarily unmute. So, pro tip that I learned from a 12-year-old. All right. Well, then that motion passes. Let's go ahead into our next item, which are public hearings. We're going to start with a public hearing opening at 6:13 for discussion on item number 3, proposed amendments related to accessory buildings in the city's code of ordinances. I think I see a couple people who may be interested in discussing this. Catherine Lee, this is a great opportunity for public discussion on this item, which would involve building accessory buildings.
Thanks. Sorry, this is Cynthia Lee. That's actually my daughter's profile.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
this is Cynthia Lee at 405 Vale. So I'm listening in with 3 kiddos in the background, but if I have the opportunity, we'll jump in. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else would like to discuss this at our public hearing? This is kind of your one and only chance really to discuss unless you're recognized by the chair during our meeting. So this is a chance to put your thoughts on the record regarding changing our code of ordinances regarding accessory buildings.
Yeah, so Mr. Scott, this is Cynthia. I don't know the most recent updates. I know last summer and fall, Alex Robinette had shared with me some of the ideas that were under consideration. So I don't know the latest on some of those policies and how that would impact the project that my husband and I had been considering. So I hesitate to say too much. I know we've been on the record a couple times, but yeah, depending on where that stands, might have additional questions.
Okay, I'll encourage you to go ahead and look at the city's, what page would this be? If you look under the city's meeting page, and anybody listening in now or later can look under the city's agendas and minutes. If you go to the main page, then agendas and minutes, and then you can find the details for this January 6th, 2021 meeting. And you'll see the agenda packet is the one you're going to want to click on. And that's got some of the details we'll be discussing tonight that you can follow along with. So that should help. All right. Would anyone else like to address the topic? All right, hearing none, we're going to close that public session on item 3 and adjourn into our regular meeting regarding this. Charlie, a quick point of order. Is that the correct way to do this? Is stick to the to each item individually, correct? We don't tackle both public hearings at once, do we?
Yeah, I would do them individually.
Individually. Okay. Thank you. All right, so we'll be discussing I'm gonna cede the floor over to Jamil to discuss our accessory buildings and our committee's thoughts on what changes might be worthwhile to propose.
Thank you. And Cynthia, thank you for your patience. I know that this has taken far longer than it should have, and I'll take a lot of responsibility for that. And then I'm gonna put the rest of the blame on Brian since he's on mute. And unfortunately, the one P&Z member that resigned from P&Z, Alex Robinette, was one of the committee of three, including me, Tony Stein, and Alex, that has worked on this. And so I'm bummed that Alex wasn't here to see it through, because I know she was pushing on your behalf, Cynthia. In any event, if you turn to what I believe is page 8 of the P&Z packet, you can see my chicken scratch, which is the culmination of several conversations amongst the members of the Rollingwood Accessory Dwelling Subcommittee, also known as RAD. And I should have known that subcommittee was destined for failure, because we called it Rollingwood Accessory Dwelling, even though that's not a term anywhere in our code. The term is accessory building or structure, not dwelling. So in any event, what you can see in our markups are our suggested revisions to the current code, to provide for what we think is perhaps a little bit more flexibility, and also perhaps some greater clarity on code, both in section 107.3, which is on page 8, and then 107.77, which is on page 9. And so maybe before walking you through the words, I thought it'd be helpful for me to just kind of talk about a few of the concepts that we covered. So we talked about attached versus detached, and how important it was, for the structure, the secondary structure, to be attached versus detached, and I think we were, as a group, generally in favor of allowing a secondary structure, no matter whether it or not it was attached or detached. We also talked about height and floors associated with that secondary structure, and we generally coalesced around the idea that the height should be, the lesser of the height of the main house and 2 floors, with some other nuances around a secondary structure that may be facing the street. We also talked about maximum square footage of a secondary structure. Currently, the code limits the secondary structure to 500 square feet. And we received some feedback that some folks would like us to look at that, and we kind of talked about the practicality of 500 square feet, and generally gravitated to a standard of 1,000 square feet, not including any unconditioned garage. And those were, if I had to sort of prioritize, those were kind of the 3 key elements. And then we had some secondary topics that we talked about as a group. And one of those, which I referenced earlier, really was on any street-facing secondary structure that sat in front of the house. We felt that should be no greater than one floor, and attached to a garage. We talked about maximum number of secondary structures, and current code has a maximum of one. We ultimately landed on two. There was a good amount of debate on that particular topic. I think we generally felt that because of the cost to build secondary structures, particularly any that would be conditioned, have plumbing, etc., there was sort of no real rationale behind somebody being motivated to go build an unlimited number of secondary structures throughout their property. So we talked about providing even greater flexibility, but ultimately decided perhaps best to take baby steps and increase the number from one to two for now. And then last but not least, we tried to rely upon the other areas of our code that already prohibit short-term rentals and renting out, garage apartments, or in this case, secondary structures. And so we tried to not take that on in these changes. We tried to really let the other areas of code that already address that topic, handle what can and can't be done there. So now jumping back to page 8, you can see in the opening paragraph, secondary building or structure means a building or structure which does not share a common roof or common wall, including but not limited to a tool house, home workshop. We have added a home office, greenhouse, garage. We have added guest house, carport, children's playhouse, etc. And so, you can see there as an example, our insertion of the guest house, while, some may immediately raise concerns if that's opening up Pandora's box on short-term rentals. We already prohibit that elsewhere in code. And so we did not feel, in terms of our recommendation to bring forward, that we felt like we needed to limit a guest house as a secondary structure. And anyone, please interrupt me as I'm going along if you have questions.
Yeah, you're doing great, Jamil, by the way.
Okay, so jumping down to number 4 in that same section, under the current code, there's language that says does not provide complete independent living facilities for one or more persons, which include permanent provisions for living, sleeping, and sanitation facilities. And really after talking that through as a group, we didn't really feel that component served a purpose. And we're happy to discuss that as a group, but that was our recommendation to delete that. And I think the obvious examples would be kind of a mother-in-law situation or father-in-law. So I'm going to hit pause for a second. That is those are our recommended changes on 107-3. Any questions, comments, or complaints?
I have some feedback on a couple of the example structures, but I don't want to mess up your flow, Jamil, because it's
okay. All right, I'll keep going. We can come back.
As Tony mentioned, it's a good one.
Okay. So on page 9 of the packet, section 107-77, as it relates to accessory buildings. Currently, code allows no more than one accessory building located on a lot. You can see there under A where we've suggested that we change that to 2. Under B, it says accessory building may be located only in a rear yard or in a side yard. And I'm sorry, I can't read the rest of the words because the numbers are planted on top of them.
It says that does not border a street.
Yeah, that does not border a street. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we talked quite a bit about this one too. And you know, Tony, chime in if you like, but I think our general feeling was that we did not have conceptually a problem with an accessory building you know, facing a street. Our concern was more about aesthetics and architecture, and less about, you know, whether or not it faced the street.
In particular, because it's obviously going to be subject to, you know, all of the normal setbacks.
Correct. So under C, an accessory building may not, current language says exceed 1 story. As I mentioned earlier, we are in support of 2 stories in height, with the qualifier that unless it is located in front of the main dwelling, in which case it may not exceed 1 story and must include a garage. And so we didn't want to have just an accessory dwelling that was facing the street that had no garage. We felt like we felt like the accessory dwelling facing the street needed to have a garage attached to it. C2, we made no changes to. C3, you can see where we've made the change. We've removed the 500 square foot condition, increased it to 1,000 square foot, and that is in conditioned area.
And there was a lot of discussion around what, you know, what that number should be, whether, you know, 1,000, or I think Alex was actually a proponent of 1,500. But anyway, I think we kind of settled on the 1,000 just based on a lot of discussion.
Hey, for clarity,
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, for clarity, is that $1,000? I mean, 1,000 square feet per building, not as a sort of a budget for both buildings?
You know, that's a really good question. I think I don't think we focused on that point, but I think we were thinking that it was 1,000 square feet in total.
Okay.
But we can talk about that as a group.
Yep.
And then also, you know, you'll see the conditioned insertion. I think the idea there was that the accessory building could be 1,500 square feet. That was 1,000 square feet conditioned and had another 500 square feet that was unconditioned, and that would be acceptable.
I think our thinking there was a Pat mother-in-law suite with a covered patio that was, all in one structure, something along those lines.
And then under D, the exterior of an accessory building used as a detached garage currently says shall match the exterior of the main building. We didn't love the words match. We debated a little bit with what words to use to replace, and ultimately landed on shall use materials that are of a consistent quality of construction as the exterior of the main building. And Carrie, you may tell us that that's going to be no easier to legislate than the word match, but we felt like that was at least trying to sort of move the intent one step forward.
Yeah, we were trying not to be too limiting, and if a lot of people build houses with multiple materials, it may not necessarily match. But if you've got wood cladding in one area and brick or stone or whatever that you might, might not technically match, but is, we as you can see, we talked about consistent with, and we kind of settled on the consistent quality.
So those really wrap up our recommendations, and look forward to talking about it as a group.
All right. Well, thank you all for your work on this. I know it's been sort of a lot of thought and a lot of time, lot of effort put into it. So we appreciate it. I think at this point, did any other members of the RAD subcommittee want to give input on this? And then we can shift over to other members of the commission.
I was just going to say, I don't know if it would be helpful to give any background on why we started talking about this in the first place, given how much time has passed, or if that's anybody cares at this point.
You can do it as long as you don't use the words attached or detached.
Well, that's really the start of it, is we were tired of talking about attached and detached. And then at some point, some of us said, do we, and that stemmed from a difficulty in the building official at the time, figuring out what attached meant and, what constituted attached. And I think we said, kind of looked around the room and said, do any of us care if a building is attached or not? And maybe that would make things a lot easier for the building official if, rather than have architects trying to, figure out how to get around or attach via any different number of methods, just say, let's just give some parameters under which you can build a detached structure. And then if they want to attach it or they want it detached, we don't need to get into all that. So that was the idea behind that. And I was told some time ago when I got on the commission that a lot of that attached, detach, and the not having the three components in that definition that would constitute a living arrangement, I forget how it's defined, but was largely based on some people's personal view of aesthetics, as well as not wanting to open the door for short-term rentals. And again, all of us on the commission at the time kind of said, why don't we let our ordinances govern the short-term rentals? And none of us thought that would be all that difficult to enforce, in a neighborly way if somebody adjacent, was clearly, using their accessory building for short-term rentals. So that was kind of the background on why we started doing this, was an effort to provide some flexibility for people building on lots, particularly larger lots, all subject to, all of the normal other building requirements and drainage and setbacks, et cetera. If all that's being met, why can't there be a little bit more flexibility in how they want to structure their house and their buildings? So,
Carrie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a quick question for Charlie. I'm just going to put him on the spot because I know that state law prohibits us at this point making mason requirement determinations. And so I'm wondering if we are allowed to put something in an ordinance that would require something to match, or if that is straying too far into those masonry requirement rules. And Charlie,
The law was written pretty broadly to prohibit a city from in any way dictating masonry requirements. And so drafting something that requires a match, and that match requires masonry, would probably be a violation of the law.
okay, I think that's helpful, just so we don't get too far down a wormhole.
so maybe our materials of a consistent quality of construction, maybe that is a little bit better. What do you think about enforcing that, Carrie?
I'm not sure that I would be able to enforce that. I think it's a good thought, why you would want it. I'm not sure that I'd be able to enforce it.
It's a pretty ambiguous phrase that, I think lawyers would have a field day trying to argue what is or is not consistent quality. What does that even mean?
Well,
It's a
and
good thing we have a lawyer on the commission that can clean this up for us.
one of the definitions of accessory building is children's playhouse. So
That I was waiting until we were into regular discussion, but I was going to point out that like, I think this is great, by the way. Like, I think we're on the right track to get some definition here that makes sense and is easy to enforce from Carrie's perspective. You know, I think there's tons of people that have little playhouses in their yard or small, you know, like a tool shed that's like not even 10 square feet, you know, things like that. And I think what we're really worried about restricting or making sure we have regulations covering is when people are actually making enclosed structures that are, you know, guest houses or garages, carports, pool houses, and things of that nature. I'm wondering if we need to think about taking out some of that legacy language about children's playhouse and, you know, like small tool sheds, whether by perhaps inserting something that says means a conditioned building or structure, because I know that you used conditioned space as sort of a qualifier later in terms of the square footage. And I thought that was interesting because does that mean I could have something that's bigger than, you know, could I have a 2,000 foot non-conditioned space? So it's something to think about. And then, or maybe there's exclusions off of here, like, you know, except that, you know, a kid's playhouse less than 100 square feet is not going to be considered a secondary structure or something to that extent. I just, those seem to be like, not like the others, was a thought. Didn't mean to steal what you were saying, Amber, which is exactly what I ended up doing. And I feel bad for that now, terribly, sorry. But that was the area that I noticed that like, maybe we should kind of think about how to tweak that.
Well, maybe just it would be helpful for me, big picture. How do people feel about more than one secondary structure? And how do people feel about having 1,000 square foot conditioned limitation? And just sort of some of the bigger movements. Do you guys agree with those concepts?
Mike and Amy, do you all have some thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I like the flexibility. I think it's very helpful for people to be able to spread things out, save trees, and deal with grade and access and all those things. So I think it's great. I really like the direction it's heading. I had the same concern. I wasn't thinking about the playhouse angle that Brian brought up or smaller buildings, but and I have vague memories of the City of Austin code that, and I don't know if the qualifier for a permanent structure is a foundation, but I think they have some sort of category of temporary structure that they allow to be placed in setbacks and other things. So I'm not saying we want to do that, but they certainly have a different class, kind of like you were talking about, which, you know, it would be nice to allow people to build fun, you know, playhouse or other structures that don't match the other, you know, the main house and you know, give them maybe a little more freedom and make that separate. I was thinking about the same point Brian brought up, which is, you know, can somebody build are we okay with someone building a 4,000 square foot, you know, unconditioned warehouse building, you know, on the back of a site? You know, is there some just maximum total square footage that we're okay with? And does that need to be some percentage of the main structure, like can't exceed 30%, or, you know, something so that at least we respect the scale. You know, I know we're doing that with the height, but with the overall scale. And then the other thought I had was around, or and I think the intention is to allow for cooking facilities. I normally don't see in codes sanitation. I see cooking, which maybe we do want to provide, maybe we don't. I kind of see it both ways, but um, I think some specificity around that might be helpful for folks, because I do think there are going to be people that want to build a true mother-in-law sort of space that is where someone can live completely autonomous from the main house. But
So on that
otherwise, I really
last
like
point,
it. I think simple.
so
And,
Michael, on that last point, the word guest house, maybe to expand that a little bit, to clarify that could include a kitchen or cooking facility. Is that what you're suggesting?
well, yeah, I don't know what the intent is. I mean, if we want to allow that, that I think that opens up a lot of potential for misuse, right? The minute that you give somebody a kitchen is the minute that I don't think with the economics of the neighborhood we're going to see a lot of this, but it does allow for somebody's buddy who's coming to town who is going to stay for free or whatever it is, and they can stay in the back house and pay them rent some other way. Who knows? But I think if we're going to open it up and allow for cooking, then do we need to be specific about who the person using it is, or whatever? I mean, does it need to be part of a family or
Well,
whatever?
the
I
city
think we
of
have some
Austin
provisions
has-
around that in the code too. I think how long a non-familial member guest can stay in a particular house. Now that's probably harder to enforce, but I think there are code provisions around some of that.
The city of Austin has rules on that. I know, that cover, say, what Hyde Park is doing with accessory buildings. And you can't, my understanding is, I mean, I don't have the ordinances in front of me, but my understanding is you can have a partial refrigerator, you can have a microwave, you can't have a stove. And so that kind of discourages, if you're going to have people renting it out, illegally or something like that, that kind of discourages it, because it really makes it just a guest house, not, an actual dwelling.
Right.
We talked a little bit about that too, and I think had some concern about, again, people, I mean, one, I could definitely see a, back house, guest house, whatever you want to call it, that maybe doesn't have any kitchen inside at all, but has a covered patio that is the, outdoor kitchen that everybody's building, nowadays. So it's sort of a part of the overall structure, and I didn't really want to preclude that. But, point taken.
So to this point, I remember that recently the code changed, and Charlie, maybe you can remind us where this took place, but we had previously had a restriction on number of people with the same related by blood or something. And then we went, because of the sort of constitutionality of some provisions, I think we modified it to be like a overall limit on number of people.
Correct.
Can you remind me where that takes place in the code?
I don't remember exactly where it's at. I can try to find it while we're sitting here.
Well, because what I would suggest that we make sure whatever we do here, and this is, part of where we ended up with trouble late, like in other things we've looked at, right? Like when we were talking about what was the RV, the camper van scenario, like it was in 2 or 3 different parts of the code, but we should tie in whatever this definition is, and the word page 8 covers it up, but does it say accessory building or structure? Is that the term we're defining? So we need to make sure that the other part of the code that talks about dwelling and the limitations on dwelling, that dwelling is defined to be the main structure and any accessory building or structure. And so somebody staying in a guest house would be additive of that or inclusive of that. And that may help with like a rent out the guest house scenario. So right? Because I think whenever we came up with the numbers that we were talking about, the idea was it was like a Galbraith +2 or something, or there's some kind of shorthand that we use for it. But whatever the number was, the idea was like it's supposed to be a single family dwelling. We don't want there to be, whether under one roof or separated, the idea was to not have a multifamily setup, like there's more than one family living there, right? And so it's just a thought I had to make sure we double check that this gets tied in with that restriction.
Hey, Tony, I don't remember if we spent a lot of time specifically talking about just, ovens/stoves, per sort of Amy's comment, but I don't really have strong feelings about that if we wanted to prohibit that secondary structure from having an oven/stoves. Do you?
No, I don't either. I'm not sure, again, I'm not sure how much it discourages or doesn't, but yeah, I have no problem with that. I mean, can you just put a grill outside and, go rent it out? But yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with that. I don't see that many scenarios where, somebody could make a case that I really, really need a stove and a full kitchen setup in a exterior building, so I definitely don't have any issue with that.
I guess
So maybe no
Allow a
interior
microwave, but yeah.
microwave.
I would like to limit the number of restrictions we put on these things. I mean, if the real intent is we just don't want another family living there or the buddy that stays for multiple months, I'd like to see if there's a different way of restricting it rather than telling people because it's like with the short-term rental thing. I think the goal that we want is there to not be short-term rentals, but making it so that, because I don't really want to tell somebody well, you can have a microwave, but you can't have a stove. To me, it just seems kind of random. Why are we doing it? It's because we don't want people renting from them.
That's what I always kept coming back to is there's other areas of the code that prevent you from renting a portion of your home, from doing short-term rentals, from having guests stay longer than a certain period of time, from the number of people that can be there. So my thought was, if you got a bad actor, do they, go out of their way to do something they know is not allowed? I don't think a stove or what we restrict on that is gonna stop a true bad actor who's trying to, willfully break the law. So that was what I kept coming back to.
Well, and to be clear, I wasn't advocating for not. I was just bringing it, up. I think there are many scenarios where you might want your mother-in-law to have a stove and be able to hang out and make herself dinner or whatever, right? So I'm not sure it's a bad thing. I'm just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah,
That's
I think
good.
that's historically been the reason. That's historically been the reason for some of these limitations is for that. And I and at least some others, I don't remember who, kind of said, why don't we let the code, the ordinances that prevent certain things, prevent those things, and let's try not to legislate those within our zoning code.
That's
Well, then,
my
Michael,
inclination. And Michael
You and
brings up a
Brian,
good point.
go ahead.
Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, Rad Chairman.
No, let's finish this. I was transitioning to kind of a related topic.
Well, I thought Michael raised a really good point, which is, I don't have an opportunity for a mother-in-law to live here right now, and I don't have the space for it probably, but it would be great if if you were going for the mother-in-law guest house scenario that some people might be interested in doing, for her to have her own, or he, father-in-law, a cooking space. I wouldn't want to, just because we're trying to limit rentals, then preclude, grandmama from baking up a souffle for me and something like that.
I'm not advocating for only microwaves, just to be clear. I'm just bringing up the options. I tend to agree with the not too many rules concept, but I may have a little bit of a conflict of interest in this issue because when I bought my house, when we bought our house, it was built in '83 and it had an accessory building that was built at the same time, which would probably be grandfathered under today's ordinances. So, you know, I've already got one. And half of it's a sauna and half of it's a wine cellar. So half of it is heated and half of it is cooled, but not both.
Brian would
awesome.
like to rent that from you if it becomes available.
I can tell you when it's 105 degrees outside, there've been a few times I've been tempted to take a folding chair and a book and go sit in the wine cellar.
That's pretty cool.
It is pretty
Well,
cool.
so trying to maybe get some closure on that particular topic. It sounds like the group is gravitating towards allowing the guest house to have a full kitchen, and then just relying upon our ordinances to protect us from the bad actors. Is that a fair assessment on that point?
I'm fine with that.
Got it. And then Michael, you and Brian both brought up a topic that we discussed a little bit on the RAD, but I think is certainly worthy of more discussion, where on page 9, item C3, we limited the square footage to 1,000 square feet, and that was intended to be in totality, not per structure of conditioned area, which then brings up, okay, so I can have 1,000 square foot conditioned structure and a 3,000 square foot metal shed. And and I think, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we sort of landed as a committee at a place where we didn't really see a reason why anybody would want to just go build a big metal shed for fun. But it certainly, since we're taking the 500 square foot limitation off, increasing it to 1,000 square feet already, I think if you guys feel like we need to build in additional protections, I think that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think we talked about that a little bit, and even talked about, a bifurcated, certain amount of conditioned and unconditioned. And I think we came back to the fact that, we've got drainage, issues that have to be met. We've got tree ordinance. We've got the practicality of, the prices that people are paying to be in this neighborhood, of the odds of somebody doing something
buying
terribly
it
outlandish.
using it as a shed.
Right. So we kind of came back to, we kicked around a few ideas of, 1,000 square feet condition and a total of 1,500 or 2,000 total or something like that. And I think we just came back and said, you can try to come up with any number of different scenarios for any of this stuff and try to write it all in there. It's hard enough to get anything, documented as it is. And we just thought, as we kind of kicked around the different scenarios, that the likelihood of somebody doing something like that was pretty remote.
So I'll chime in on, Tony, what you just said, except I kind of zig where you guys zag, or I zag where y'all zig, of it's really hard to codify what people are going to do. And that hasn't really been my spirit, and hasn't been this P&Z commission spirit for a while, of trying to tell people what they can and can't do. So I do come around to limiting the amount of square feet we think works, or the city would be comfortable with, and not worrying about whether it's conditioned or unconditioned. It's just, here's the amount of square feet you can have separated from your main house in 2 different structures. And whether that's 100 feet of clubhouse, or 100 feet of a storage pod, or 100 feet of a tool shed, or, and then 1,500 feet or whatever it may be. I kind of come down to, let's pick the amount we're happy to have separated in, and I like the idea of 2 spaces. I think that makes sense. In 2 spaces separate from your main house, and whether you condition it or not is up to you, and not make our team have to measure it. They just measure how big is it. And if I was doing that, I would suggest we up the size a bit from 1,000.
I feel like I don't want to manipulate or dominate the conversation. So if I'm talking too much, but I'll respond to. I'm kind of in favor of what has been proposed by the RAD here in a conditioned space restriction, and I'll sort of to respond to what you say, Jordan, is that I actually agree with you that I think regulating that less has kind of been a good goal. Whatever you want to do with it, go ahead. To me, that means I don't really care how many of these structures, if you did 2 500s versus 1 1,000. I do think that, like, and Carrie could probably speak to this, they'll have to submit a plan for this. And so it's really easy to tell from the plan, just like you do from the building permit process for a residential building, like a house. It'll have a conditioned square footage number on those plans. And I guess I like the idea now that I think about it more, especially if we go up and kind of inject the word conditioned to the definition of accessory building. Because here's where I see there being difficulty is now all of a sudden you've got people coming in and be like, well, my neighbor has 2 playhouses and they have a pergola with an arbor. And so, you know, if you add those things all up and it's like, well, but that, and then they're like, and there's a deck underneath the pergola. So technically that's a roof and a floor. And you're like, come on, guys. I mean, this is not what we were intending to regulate. We're just trying to make sure that if you want a detached garage or a guest house or something like that, it's going to have to be 1,000 square feet or less.
So I'll say that in some ways I've stressed the code here in Rollingwood, like many others. I parked a shipping container in the backyard of my rental house because we needed to store some furniture in there for a while, and upset my neighbor to the point where we're no longer friends. And he wasn't upset when I put it in there. He's upset when I moved away that I sold it to the guy who bought the house and that it stayed there. He had assumed it would be a temporary structure, and he was upset that I didn't take it away. I'm like, that guy can buy his own shipping container tomorrow. He just got mad that I left it there. So I agree with what you're saying. I think to me, I'm thinking just set the bumpers, set the guidelines. People can drive a truck through. We've already shown that people will drive a truck through the code. So I'm for one of simplicity, and I think a number, whatever that number may be, is the easiest way to limit
Appreciate it.
in a clear fashion for our, whether that's 2,000 square feet, 1,500, 1,000. I think a clear amount just becomes it. And yeah, if someone's going to argue about a pergola and a deck, I've got one of those at my lake house. I've got a pergola and a deck, and the city of Austin for sure includes that in my impervious coverage. They include that in the building permit. They include it in all of it, even though it's an outdoor unconditioned space. So I guess I'm used to dealing with that sort of thing. So
one other thing I think just worth mentioning, you know, to the extent we do want to address the non-conditioned space in terms of square footage, is it can at times be pretty tricky to measure, because we're talking about a variety of different types of structures. You know, what is the square footage of, like, I built a cabana. Do you measure it by the concrete, or do you measure it by the roof? Or, you know, you're talking about a pergola. How do you measure the square footage of a pergola? And so that can get pretty tricky. So if we are going to go down that path, I think we need to figure out a method of measurement.
100%. I hadn't really chimed in because you guys are ticking off a lot of the things. By ticking off, I mean checking off a lot of the items that I came up with. But across all of them, I think it's that measurement of giving clear and concise ways of measuring. Jamil, if you'll allow me, and then I'll quit talking. It's just same to height, of giving sort of defined limitations. One story can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. So if we mean 10 feet with a roof that's 5 feet of roof, then it's 15 feet, or is it 18 feet, or is it 20 feet with a real sharp roof line kind of a thing. So I think just across all these is really giving our staff real kind of clear guidelines on how to measure all of these things is a really good endeavor. I had that for how do you measure differences in quality. Yeah, otherwise we've checked everything I've got in here. I had, like, just to talk it off, I got how do you determine height? Should we pick square feet? Is that total or the building? We've kind of talked about it in total. In my mind, that also goes to conditioned or unconditioned. How do we just make it easy? And then I put, do we exclude structures less than 100 square feet? Which I think a couple people have already hit on. Of just, is there some bottom number that we say, look, if it's under this, we're not going to stress about it. So we don't have people out there counting playscapes and trampolines and all that kind of stuff. So
It's a good point.
I know at one point we had a concept of, you know, say exceed 1,000 square feet in condition area and, you know, whatever the other number is, 1,500 square feet in total building area. And maybe you could say as measured by the square footage of the foundation or something along those lines. If you had that would cover you if you had an uncovered patio, I guess. Or if you don't care about the uncovered patio, you could do it as square footage of the roof coverage.
What do you think, Carrie, about ease of measurability?
Carrie, you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Can you repeat that question?
what are
Me?
your thoughts about ease of measurability for height of a structure, for size of it? Like what would you be up against?
I mean, I feel like there's kind of two components. And what I'm thinking about is a cabana where you have kind of an interior enclosed space and maybe a roof that comes over and provides cover, that kind of provides a porch. And what there's going to kind of be two, I see that as looking at two different things. One is the impervious cover of the roof, which, you know, would fall, I'd be looking at with the drainage criteria manual, and that anything over 250 square feet requires drainage review, and then interior space. And so I don't really care how y'all determine it, but if you're looking at two different ways of deciding it, what that would lead to is a situation where, you know, somebody might have to, you know, I'm just working with different numbers.
Yeah.
So, but it doesn't really matter to me. I don't feel like there's one way that's easier than another.
Let me ask the hard question, y'all. And Charlie, feel free to tell me that this is not on the agenda, and we'll get it in the next one. But are we beating around the bush when it comes to just talking about an FAR, a floor to area ratio? And I feel like this commission's real easy on flexibility. And is there a possibility to say, if you got a 10,000, you know, however large our lot is, I think our minimum size 15,000, but starting to say, these are the number of structures you can have in relationship to the size of your lot. And we don't care if they're front yard, backyard, and up, down, left, right. I mean, Charlie, am I even allowed to talk about that given notice?
I think it's, you know, within the realm of possible discussion, based on your angle.
Okay. You know, we're saying, okay, you can only have two structures, and are we going to do, I still am struggling with the conditioned versus unconditioned. And I've been doing a lot of walks with this in mind, and I've seen some garages that were attached by a little bitty, you know, roof line. We're talking 3 feet, attach it to the thing. And it's got a deck on top of the garage. So are we talking about that being the space? Like, is the garage going to be included or not included? I understand you guys probably went through the exact same conversations to say, okay, we're not going to include the garage space. What are we going to do? We include the deck they put on the flat roof of the garage as part of their outdoor space? Is this now a structure? Well, it's unconditioned. Okay. And I think it's sort of what it comes down to me is like, I really don't mind that they have a garage in their front yard, and that the fact that they had to attach it with a little 3-foot roof is silly to me. If we're concerned about overdevelopment of any given lot, is the biggest, easiest lever to say, this is how many square feet of structures that you can build on your lot based upon the size of the lot, like they do in commercial building. So did y'all even talk about that? Did it come up? Maybe not.
We didn't talk about FAR.
No, we didn't talk about that. Yeah.
Because we frankly, didn't really feel like it was, it was the topic that we were asked to cover.
Yeah.
I have an opinion on FARs, but it's, I'm not sure now's the right time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about how there's just all kinds of other restrictions on the amount of area you can build, whether it be drainage, TCEQ, impervious coverage restrictions, setbacks, trees, et cetera.
What's FAR stand for again?
Florida area ratio.
Florida area ratio. So if
Floor
you have a
to
15
area of the lot ratio, that's what that is. Basically,
Yeah.
like
So
if this is, it's leaving aside setbacks, it's like some amount of the lot that can be covered, and that's it.
Yeah, but it includes stories. So if you do certain FARs and you build 2 stories, the square footage of the site, so it's not like impervious coverage. The area of your second story would count.
typically conditioned
matter-
space.
Yeah, I'm happy to send a definition of a few municipalities that use it around here over. I'm not trying to torpedo it. I'm like, if that's not of interest to the commission to discuss, to me, I'm all about how do we measure this? How do we make it measurable? I do not need neighbors. Listen, I'm on a particularly nutty side of the neighborhood over here. So I could see neighbors out there with laser measures, you got an extra 1 square foot on your garage and all that kind of silliness. And you built an illegal clubhouse. And I'm just coming down to how do we make this easy on our city staff and on ourselves to say, oh, I'm with you guys. I don't mind if there's a garage in the front yard. It doesn't bother me. I don't mind if there's a pergola in the side yard. It comes down to, at some point, you can overdevelop a lot. And what is that point for us as a community? I'm sure there's probably hard to get consensus around it. So I'll withdraw FARs if we want to. That's fine.
Hey, Carrie, try this on for size. And I don't even know if the other P&Z members agree, but if instead of 1,000 square feet in conditioned area, it was 1,000 square feet in conditioned area, or 1,500 square feet of conditioned and unconditioned area, where the unconditioned area would be measured by its foundation.
I don't know.
You could have
I think-
1,000. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think the unconditioned square area might need to be measured by the roof.
Okay.
But I mean, that's just kind of my like off the cuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen on the unconditioned spaces, it measured at the foundation or the roof, whichever's greater. If it's a pergola with columns or whatever, I think that's somewhat standard-ish language. But on the size, I mean, I don't know. I think I don't know, maybe I'm changing my mind as we talk about it. I like the simplicity that you guys put in at 1,000 square feet, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think that the likelihood for abuse is super small. So I don't know if there's just a way to, like, you know, pick some number that is large enough to provide a lot of flexibility, but that's hardly ever going to come into play. And it's just to you know, really get the bad actors. Maybe it's like your secondary structures can't be more than 50% of the total area of the house or something, which should provide people plenty of space. But I do the height part of it. I've seen in other municipalities where they say that it has to be 5 feet less or 10 feet less, some measurable number, because I think one of the things that you could, if you don't limit the size, and if you don't watch the height, well, you know, you could see how someone could have a little small peak of a main house that sticks up to 35 feet. And the next thing you know, you've got that's, you know, just a small part of the main house. And then you've got some secondary dwelling over here that's, you know, 32 feet just below it or whatever. And it's massive. And so I think just, you know, if we can just kind of just hit the broad strokes, but keep it simple, you know, just to encourage or discourage the worst abuse.
Yeah, maybe we do a footage of height where we had, you know, 1 story. If it's in front, Jamil, maybe we go to a specific height. And then as we've talked about this more too, and thinking about that square footage being a total number for, you know, your 2 allowable accessory buildings, I'm starting to think that maybe that number should be a little bit higher. You know, because again, I think, you know, for somebody to go do, say it's 1,500 square feet or percentage of the main house. I mean, a lot of these, I do want to have flexibility. If somebody buys an acre lot, you know, they probably should be able to have, you know, a larger structure than somebody that's got a third of an acre lot.
Not to interrupt anybody, is the commission open to handing one of our guests 3 minutes to give their thoughts?
Absolutely.
Signal by nodding if you're up for it. Okay. Ms. Lee, I think we'll give you 3 minutes.
Okay, I won't need 3, but I would like to request that maybe that FAR be considered, especially when you think about some of the older homes and the wide open lots that we have compared to some of the newer structures that are really filling up the lot. I think that's kind of the direction of the conversation here is, I mean, my particular lot has quite a bit of open space. I value that. But, you know, I would like to, you know, actually exceed that 1,000 by a bit. And my lot would support that without even looking nearly as full as some of the other new homes that are being built on lots. So I like the idea of that FAR, if that's something that y'all might toss around a little bit more.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee. Y'all, we're at about an hour on the topic. I want to just take a quick pause and say, is this something we want to keep talking about, keep going on? Is it, I want to respect everybody's time. Does the commission want to go in and come back? Do we want to push something off to the city? You know, in the end, we're making recommendations to city council as the ultimate outcome of this. You know, Jamil, what guidance do you need from the commission as a whole, if any? Are you ready for us to consider this for sort of thumbs up, thumbs down? How would you like to proceed?
Well, we've gotten a lot of good feedback. It seems to me like some of the wording needs to be tweaked a little bit, and I think we could use staff's help, particularly when it comes to some of these measurement concepts, because they're the ones that are actually having to handle it out in the field. And I would hate for us to just, keep swinging and miss. I think they could probably nail it with their first try. And so it seems like something that needs refinement to then come back. It doesn't feel like it's quite fully baked yet.
Okay.
But I'm also sensitive to Miss Lee, and I know she's been extremely patient. And so, if there are members on P and Z that would like to push this through and get it in the hands of council, I think we've got enough feedback that we could, try to clean it up and send it to them.
I will say
I-
council didn't ask for this. We are sort of asking them to consider it. So Ms. Lee, I want you to know this is P and Z generated, at least that's my recollection of it. And because of an issue we see within the code. And so they'll still have to discuss it. They may kick it back down to us and they may ask us to go back and consider a whole different set of options. So,
Yeah, well, hey, I appreciate all the work that you guys have done, especially over this challenging last year. This last year didn't want to push too hard in any case, given the environment, but hey, there's certainly runway to do the right thing and take some time and get it right. So happy to be patient a little longer. And
okay, thank you. Jamil, I'm happy to, I'll say from a high point, I'm hearing a lot of consensus around the idea of more than one. And I know we kind of kicked that around a little bit. So I like at least two structures around additional square feet with some sort of measurement to that. Whether it's conditioned or unconditioned, my thoughts and everyone else's on that at this point. And then some way to measure heights, I think is important. You're hearing that. So if y'all don't mind going back and working with staff to come up with ways that make sense to be able to measure these items, so that there is some limitation that can then be adjusted if necessary, I'd appreciate it. Is that a good way forward?
Yeah, I'm great with that. And on the FAR request from Ms. Lee, I personally don't feel, again, I have some opinion on FAR, but I personally don't feel comfortable starting to use an FAR concept in here. It just seems like that's a whole different thing that has broader ramifications than just accessory dwellings. And seems like we would need far greater stakeholder input if we're going to start using an FAR.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I also think if we go back and talk, we should, now that Alex is off, I think we should have Mike or Brian maybe join the RAD committee to maybe help wrap some of these specific changes up.
Mike or Brian, are you guys open to joining?
Happy to
Yeah.
help.
Happy to help, however.
All right, Jamil, I'm gonna leave it to you to pick one of the two, and we can only have one just because of quorum issues.
Can
Okay.
I ask about the FAR thing before Miss Lee signs off? Why is that? To me, that sounds more restrictive, and like we're putting in more restrictions. Is it because of the sort of current 1,000 square foot cap that has you concerned, and so you feel like if we switch to an FAR, that would make things better because it's just an overall ratio to your lot size?
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think part of this whole thing is the aesthetic, right? And when you think about the aesthetics of what people do with their lot and how much they're putting on that footprint, I know, again, there's other things like impervious cover and the like, but I could easily fit 1,500, 2,000 square feet and still have a lot of wide open space because my home is older and smaller. And so I just want to maximize what I can use and the value of what I want to do in that area. But I understand, the hesitation on FAR, but just maybe some perspective on that.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's do this. If we're gonna push it back to the RAD committee, Jamil will talk with Michael and Brian and select one of them for inclusion within the committee to replace Commissioner Robinette. And our sort of goal is to really, my understanding of it, as I'm hearing it, is to define some of the measurements. Am I missing anything else?
I think the measurements and how to address the conditioned versus unconditioned,
Okay.
both in the area that I addressed and as Brian has pointed out under the opening sentence in 7.3 as well. And so I think for that reason, Brian, if you would be okay joining the RAD, I think your feedback would be helpful in terms of just sort of ticking and tying this thing to make sure it's all, you know, put together with a lawyer's set of eyes on it.
Yeah, I'm happy to, but I also, if Michael's really excited about this, I don't want to get in the way of that. I mean, it's just,
I'd take you both if I could have 4.
I'm happy to resign.
I think you need an attorney. You need an attorney for the language.
this RAD ratio, the ratio for the RAD team members seems to be like, you know, about a 33% hit rate. So I don't know what I'm getting into if I said yes, I guess. I'll get Michael's input then if I take that spot, or vice versa. How about that? So
Nope. That's a walking quorum, bud. We got you. It's got to just be the 3 of y'all knocking it out, and then you bring it to the rest of the group to discuss. Otherwise, it's a walking quorum. Yeah. Not my laws. It's the laws of Davy Crockett and Sam Houston. So, all right.
Technically Abbott.
Oh, Abbott. Sorry.
Well, thanks for your feedback, guys.
All right, very good. Okay, we'll go ahead and if there's no further input, why don't we all take a look at we're going to open up public hearing on item number 4. Are we good? Y'all ready to move on?
So ready.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and open up a public hearing on item number 4 to discuss fences, maximum lot size, restrictions on combining lots, minimum required depth and width of yards, and we'll open that at 7:23. Is there anybody from the public who would like to address these items that we're about to discuss? If so, please signify by raising your hand. You can click the icon or press star. Ashley, I wrote it down. What was it again?
Star 9. We
Star
don't
9.
have anyone joined just by phone right now.
Okay. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public part of this meeting here at 7:24 and resume back into regular session. So y'all, this is involving a kind of a bunch of different things that are starting just to become a little bit more of an issue. And we've talked about it a little bit. You've got the code in here, and I will give a couple of examples, and I don't know how much I really want to dive into this tonight. Some of the issues we are having with the way we define our fences are, we're sort of 2 issues that I think we might be able to tackle here. One, and it's kind of the most upfront one, is pool safety and the idea of our front yard fences and the height. We limit those two at 3 feet, 36 inches. And that pool safety requires 48 inches. And so that has created a little bit of heartburn and some cause for frustration with some of our neighbors who don't mind having just with some of the weird lots we've got, that when their fence might be considered a front yard fence and then is limited to 36 inches, it's then not compliant with pool fencing rules, so they have to go put in a second fence for, say, around their pool, which can be frustrating. So that's why fence height is in here. We've got this other sort of bigger issue that involves the combination of lots into what had been referred to in the past as an estate lot. Large lots, bringing them together, and what does that do to the expectations of our neighbors? I will tell you, with my brief time on the strike force, there's a lot of consternation around this idea that when we bought my house, we have a certain level of expectation about what can be done with the houses around us and the properties around us. And when lots are combined, the way our code works with front yard, backyard, and side yard, what used to be a front yard can become a backyard. And I don't think people really truly understand that through our code. So the issues that we're seeing are neighbors who were used to looking out at a house. That house gets bought by the neighbor who lives on the parallel street from them, the next street over, and becomes the backyard to that house. We've avoided it with some fencing and green fences, but some of the combinations have put us to where you might have a large fence 15 feet from back a curb that fences in the backyard of a lot from a parallel house. And because it's now, if that lot is, if those two lots that are in tandem are platted, you now got this issue of that second lot is no longer a front yard, it's now a backyard. So I don't know if the issue is so much the platting of a tandem lot, but you know, if you were living next to one of these, you would understand that they couldn't really fence off their front yard to 30 feet because it's a front yard. Now when it becomes a backyard, you could have an 8-foot fence to 15 feet that your neighbor's allowed to build that you're not allowed to actually even put up your own fence on. We already have this issue with corner lots. They are allowed to fence within 15 feet of a corner. I will tell you, my neighbors on both of the corners closest to my house have both fenced within 15 feet, and their neighbor who's on the interior lot, again, can't really put up their own, they can't even put up their own fence. They're not allowed to, even though the neighbor has a fence within 15 feet. So these are kind of some of the stuff I wanted to talk about with y'all and just see if there's any appetite. Are we fine with the way things are? Do we want to try and allow for a taller open fence to fix this pool issue, that those who don't mind having an open fence in a side yard can have that fence, sort of have it fall in under these rules of front yard fencing and yet still have pool protection by having a 4-foot fence? Do we want to restrict the height of fences? If you notice when you read this, we don't actually restrict height on fences that I could find. And Carrie, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but I never actually found that we have any fence restrictions on height.
We don't.
So that makes it even more of an issue if someone wanted to build a 15.
Yard fences.
Sorry, go ahead.
Only front yard fences.
Front yard fences, yeah.
But,
Right.
but if a fence is higher than 6 feet, it has to be engineered, I think, right?
I thought we had to get permission to build an 8-foot fence. Am I wrong on that?
It may not be in the code sections that we have referenced, but I couldn't find it.
I thought you have to get a permit for any fence, and that if the fence
Correct.
is going to be over 6 feet, it has to be engineered.
Well, I looked it up about 2 years ago because we were looking at putting an 8-foot fence in part of our yard to cover the outbuilding from the neighbors. And I remember checking the codes and the ordinances, and I thought I found something that said it's 6 feet. That, you know, you can get permission to make it bigger, but you have to get permission.
Permission from whom?
Well, I guess we'd have to get a variance.
No, I don't think we have a height restriction in there.
Well, I hope you're right, but, you know, I just remembered at the time, you know, seeming to find that 8 feet was not allowed. So interesting to know, because there are some mansions going up right now with very high fences.
I will tell you that our previous building official said if it's permitted, you could go to 100 feet. Which
I was just going to quote Mike Alexander on the issue.
Yeah.
There's no restriction on it as far as, and I looked at the code. I didn't see anything in there.
Well, maybe it's a recovered memory, but if we can go to 100 feet, that's concerning.
Yeah, if it's permitted and if it hasn't, and if it's engineered, you can do it. Not that anybody's doing it, but Mike would say that quite a bit. He referenced that quite often.
I'm going to build a 100-foot fence and a 4,000-foot unconditioned structure.
Yeah.
Sounds like
A tertiary structure at that.
Sounds
gonna
like
be
Jamil's drive-in theater. I'm looking forward to movies in the neighborhood again. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Hey, Jordan, I personally would be supportive of addressing the inconsistency in fence height between the front yard fence and the pool code compliant fence. I personally struggled with that. Carrie worked with us and was great to deal with to get it resolved. But I think between me, Carrie, and my builder and my landscape architect, I think the four of us read code and came up with 4 different interpretations of what we could or couldn't do. And so maybe that speaks to the intellect of Jamil and his team, because I'm sure Carrie's was the right interpretation, but it does seem to create a little bit of an unintended consequence.
Well, let me kind of tackle it this way, which is there's a number of fixes, and I'm trying to identify the problem. Because I feel like the fences with the pools is definitely a pretty easily fixable solution. And yet we then create sort of downstream issues, as we always do when we just tweak something. So is there an appetite on this commission do we want to tackle the joining of lots? Do we care about that? Do we want to say they got to be side by side instead of tandem? Do we care about people taking lots that used to have a house and a front yard and turning it into a side yard or a backyard? Do we care about any of this stuff?
I think the side by side usually works out okay. I'm open to hearing if there's a problem. The front to back definitely creates some, or can create some pretty significant issues. I think my general off the cuff reaction to that is you shouldn't be able to do it. For that reason, you create a backyard that is now adjacent to somebody else's front yard.
Yeah.
And you got a 6 or 8 or 100-foot fence.
Yeah.
That is closer to the street than the front of their house is to the street.
Well, and I'll tell you, as I thought about it, it's like, and if we allow separate, if we allow 1,500 square feet, now I'm looking out at their garage that's now 20 feet from the curb or 20 feet from the property line, because that would be a rear yard. So the setback changes, you know what I mean? Like it's no longer even with the other houses on the street.
I think the solution in the front to back to me is you can buy both and own both and use them both, but they have to both be individual, platted lots and meet those restrictions. So you could build which in fact it's not a front to back, but say, Roy Cedars, you'd have to go build, I think his in fact are 2 different lots and 2 different structures, that both meet all the setbacks. I think on a front to back, you'd have to do that, meaning you have 2 front yards and you have 2 backyards. So you can't go build your house in the middle of the whole lot where it's, sitting in the, adjacent to the backyards of your neighbors. So
yeah, but what if you wanted to put your, like, I think, and I don't know Roy Cedars' setup, but there's a pool in the middle. What if that pool?
But I think it's set back from, but I think, if you have a front to back, the pool has to be whatever, I don't remember if the pool is 20 or 15 feet, but whether you build your pool on, lot A or lot B, it has to be 15 or 20 feet away from, the rear property line, because there's still 2 individual lots.
Yeah, so you end up with a 20 to 25 foot buffer in the middle of your lot.
Right. Which is where the buffer
combined
is with your
lot where you
neighbors.
can't do anything, right?
Right.
It's got to be yard.
Yeah.
Tony, I'm supportive of what you just laid out. I agree. I mean, the idea of you buying a house and having your front door facing timberline as an example, and you got a row of houses that all have front doors facing timberline. You wake up one day and your next door neighbor, now their backyard is facing timberline, and they've got a curb cut and a garage, a big garage right up on the property line. Just seems a little odd to me. If you want to buy a front to back, I think they ought to be 2 separate platted lots.
Yeah,
Is
and
this-
I think you could still have your garage on the back lot if you want to, but it's going to have to be 30 feet
Right.
back, and
That's
you have one curb cut. Yeah.
And 1,500 square feet and, you know, fit the definition that we have for our minimum house size.
Is Timberline where this has happened or something? I'm
No,
having
it's-
trouble
it's-
visualizing it.
There was talk of a rolling wood Timberline one that
Yep.
matched up perfectly back to back. And I think the builder initially floated the idea of building something squarely in the middle, and I don't remember why it.
They had a utility easement that they wanted us to drop, and that was a pretty easy no.
Now, on the other side, I think on the side by side, like Jamil, had you wanted to merge your two lots and build squarely in the middle of those, I don't see, you know, maybe somebody can point out something I'm missing, but I don't really see an issue with that. Or even a, corner like Jamil, your neighbor, Tolly Bernard, and then the Withers are behind them. You know, if somebody bought both of those and leveled it and wanted to front their house on, I guess that's Bettis, in the middle of those two, I don't see how that, I don't see how that really impacts
Yeah.
Well,
those.
I used to, this one on Laura Lane, and we're kind of like, we share a side lot line, but we used to have both of those. And I'd always thought I'd be able to move, like put something right in between if I had wanted to.
And I think, yeah, where the way yours lays out, I don't think that really harms your neighbors to do that. But the front to back, to me,
I see what you're,
definitely-
so is the best way to regulate this though? They would have to replat to achieve what they're wanting to achieve, right? So for almost all the lots in the hood, they're all in a neighborhood plat, right? And to do something that would go over those lot boundaries, they would need to replat it, I think.
Well, yeah, and maybe Jordan, maybe what you brought up is really the governing aspect, is that I think in almost every scenario, there's public easement along the rear lot line, right? That you would have to go get. I mean, you can't go build over the easement. So does that govern this anyway? Would they have to go get a?
Yeah, I think the issue is that even if you had an easement down the middle, it changes. I mean, to me, it could be a creative solution might say, look, the building line is, if it faces a street, it's 30 feet. If on that side of the house faces the street, you got a 30-foot setback on your building line. I don't know what it is for that. And, then you get into corner lots. What's our setback and that kind of issue? It has to do with the way our code defines front yard, backyard, side yards. And our code does say you have to have a front yard, a backyard, and a side yard. So
Are there any cases where we have a backyard on one of the currently platted configurations where there's a backyard fronting a street?
yes, it is on the corner of Hatley and Riley and Vance and Riley. We've got actually, I think it's 3 or 4 lots that have been platted and replatted. So if you're on Vance and Riley, do y'all want to, do you guys mind allowing me to share my screen?
Go for it.
Test that out. Pull it up on.
I mean, while you're looking, the only thought is that, I guess notwithstanding those existing lots, but can we say that, if you do combine it, because there may be some benefits to combining a through lot to be able to build in the middle. I mean, probably there's going to be a utility easement 50% of the time, but there may be a few that aren't, and maybe there's trees that can be saved if someone were to build that structure, across what were the 2 rear lot lines. But can we say that in no event can you ever have the standard rear setback when you front a street, and then you always have to preserve the 30 feet.
So I like what Michael's discussing or proposing, but I had to step out for 1 second, I'm sorry, but I had a question about procedurally when these things get replatted. can we do this case by case as a P and Z commission to, so for example, if somebody's going to take a Rollingwood to Timberline combo and they want to replat it as one, 2 lots as one, could we do basically what Michael's saying? Okay, well, in this scenario, we've looked at the lot, given the existing structures and how this started as 2, we'll let you make that a combined lot with a rear, but the rear, we would build in a building zone and fencing zone of, no further back than this or something like that. Can we do it? Is that part of the P? I always forget how we replat something that's already been platted.
Charlie, can we do that?
I have to think through that.
Okay.
I mean, I guess if they're combining two, we'd have to, yeah, they have to.
I mean, we'd have to write it into, I think you could probably accomplish something like that. You would just need to write it. We would have to figure out how to write it into the code so that we didn't put, and I can't remember, Carrie, who's, or maybe Jordan or maybe y'all, who's final approval authority for plats? Is it P&Z or is it city council?
Council.
City
Council.
council. Okay. And so we just have to make sure that, and does it come to P&Z first, I guess?
Yes.
For recommendation, so it's a 2-step process. We just have to write it to make sure that it's not arbitrary and capricious. I mean, we might be able to do something like that. I just have to take a closer look at it.
What's the
Charlie,
current
would we be
standard for
allowed-
a plat? Sorry.
Charlie, would we be allowed to treat yards that are side adjacent and replatting differently or than properties that are rear adjacent?
Yeah, I mean, you can set up the rules in platting however you want. It's just we have to make sure if you're gonna. It's what it sounded like is that was being discussed was trying to come up with the ability to, on a case-by-case basis, make a decision. That scares me a little bit unless we have objective analysis with respect to how it's done, or we allow for a variance process that could go to the P&Z. I mean, those are the things that pop into my head. And I think the question was going to be, what's the standard for approval of plats? It's a ministerial approval requirement so long as it meets the requirements of the code.
So one thing, Mike, jumping back to yours on the back-to-back, I thought about this with that Rollingwood Timberline one, and I think the issue you have too is if you could, forgetting about easements, if you could build sort of in the middle of a back-to-back lot, you now have a house structure that, you've got 4 neighbors, right? You have a house in the middle that looks right into both of their backyards, on either side, which I think would probably be, unappealing to those neighbors.
Yeah, no, I thought about that. I was thinking about that too, but I think, and I see the negative in that. But I think the rear setback's 10 feet. So,
20.
so 40. So yeah.
Yeah.
Ashley, do you mind enabling screen share, or is it Amber who's hosting? There's a host and a co-host there.
I can do it also.
Okay.
For you, Jordan.
Yes, please.
Confirm that Ashley has not fallen asleep yet.
I'm still here.
Yeah, it's good.
You
Well
should
done.
All right. Can you all see a Google map on your screen?
Yep.
Okay. So this property here, front yard faced Riley. On Vance Lane, the front yard faced Vance, front yard faced Vance. We platted this several times, if you guys recall, about 18 months ago, I want to say. And the issue was they wanted to plat it as one. They wanted one extra building. They didn't want to build it to our minimum building size. They didn't need a 1,500 square foot one. And so we were just kind of juggling different parts of the code. To be honest, the thing we just talked about probably would have sorted them out. But when we platted this several times, the front of the house changed to enable building. So if I go take our little guy here, let me drop him in. This is during construction. We're now on Vance facing the house. And you can see they've got what looks to be a 4-foot fence. And they use green walls. I will tell you, I got calls from neighbors when this was originally proposed to be a solid fence. Because it
And
was,
that is what, the rear yard now? Is that why that
yeah.
fence is?
So what
where it
we
is?
used to be looking at the front of a house here and a front of a house over here. These are 2 lots.
Right.
This is the second lot, I believe, here. And so, you know, we have it in different spaces along. There's some funky stuff over in here. Yeah, this being the second lot over here. So some of the neighbors weren't excited to be looking out at a 8-foot fence, 8-foot solid fence, like they're looking out on this construction fence, 15 feet back a curb, which when the house was platted originally to face, and I'll go back, if you can kind of see where when it was facing over Hatley, that's what the code says you can do. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So this would have been technically the entire, I call it an end cap, like the end cap of a grocery store, where this would have been frankly, any height they could put in 10 or 12-foot fence, which can be engineered easily. I've seen them in Los Angeles. I've seen 15-foot and 20-foot fences there.
But
I
the
think-
front on this is Riley, right?
At one point when we platted it, I believe the front actually faced, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but I believe the front, we did a plat where the front was actually then over onto Hatley, and then we replatted it back to Riley.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I do see how the neighbor, if you go back down where we just were, I mean, I can see how that neighbor that fronts on Vance, you know, over to the side of the construction trailer would, you know, could have a problem with, you know, that backyard effectively extending
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. And so they were, you know, these neighbors here all were like, so am I just going to be looking at a fence? So some of these neighbors too, they were concerned about it. And so we worked, I mean, in the end, we did exactly what local government's good to do. You work with the owners, you work with the neighbors, you come up to a solution that works for everybody. That said, it was a lot of platting and replatting, and I think generally speaking, there's an issue when we start to plat houses that sort of go front to back. We have several of them.
Doesn't that violate the front yard fence ordinance if it goes all the way up to the corner of Vance and Riley?
Vance and Riley.
If that fence goes over there, then that's technically the front yard. If that's all one lot now, is that what you're saying?
I think that when that fence was installed, and that if that was a rear and a side yard, you have a 15-foot setback. Then when you replat the lot to reface Riley, that's now a grandfathered out of code structure.
Right. He's now got some non-conforming
Non-conforming.
sections of fence and possibly non-conforming buildings because of the replat. But he did it in phases. And so, you know, whatever he constructed at that point met the requirements of code, and then they would replat, and then it would meet, you know, he could build the rest of the fence and it would meet the requirements of the code at that point.
Wow.
You can just, okay. That stuff was built with the never mind. This is not a topic for today's conversation.
Yeah. I will point out this. not a topic for today's conversation. That cracked me up when I was walking. I was like, hey, there's one.
Yeah. I
there you
remember
go.
when we were talking about it's impossible for a circle drive to connect two different, and I was like, well, it's entirely possible. I've seen my kids take that on their bike.
Yeah. All right. Well, how about this? Let's go back with staff and try to come up with some code for us to recommend to city council about what we'll call tandem plats. it's an issue in certain parts of the city. You can see on the map that I'm sharing, there's a lot that has this opportunity to become tandem platted rather than side by side.
Well, yeah, and if you look right there on Farley, those line up perfectly. So Farley to
These
Vale.
are actually owned by the same person right now.
Well, but below there, between Farley and Vale, you know, if somebody bought both of those and built in the middle, you can see how the structure would be,
Yep.
you know, kind of imposing on their backyards.
Yes. It's more of the city than you would think as you get in on it. As you nailed it, Rollingwood and Timberline, it's almost the entire stretch. So much of this is lined up, not all of it, but a lot as you get into closer to Edge Grove, the Platts. Between Edge Grove and Ewing, it's almost every single plat. There's just a lot of them that do line up for that sort of issue. So now,
Yeah, I was curious, you know, the question was more like, is there an original lot where somebody has a rear yard, you know, that is fronting a street currently?
yes.
That wasn't a subject of a replat.
Yeah, not the subject of a replat, subject of a plat. We looked at this one in depth, where you notice front yard faces Almerian, rear yard faces Hubbard. Technically same with this other one on Almerian where they actually touch both. Farley has some, I think. No, I guess it doesn't. But in a weird way, this one touches Hatley. It's not parallel, but it then touches Farley. Same with this as well. So there's some kind of weirdness in there. There's not a ton of them, honestly. Most of ours have this kind of back to back, but there are a few that are platted right now within parallel streets. So Mike originally proposed if you're on parallel streets, you can't have a plat that faces parallel streets. And I pointed out, because they're my neighbors, I was like, that immediately makes these two lots non-conforming. That's not going to work. And for that matter, this third lot, because they face parallel streets. So that wasn't a solution. We're at, just as a way to move forward, do you guys want to set some people to work with staff? Do we want to just ask staff to go away and come back with language? Do you want to charge me to do that? What I could do it with Tony if he's dropping off the RAD committee. I heard a rumor. So, I mean, I'm happy to work with Mike on this and we can have a little subcommittee. I don't want to go off on my own and get too far down a path without checking back in with y'all or at least another commission member. So
Is it too simplistic to say that that we just will not allow a plat on a back-to-back, you know, situation, you know, in a tandem? I mean, because that pretty much accomplishes every aspect of Tony's concerns about, you know, everyone's concerns about fencing a front yard or what was a front yard. And then, you know, it fixes the alignment issues that, you know, you have if somebody can build across what was rear property lines. Is that simple and easy enough?
Charlie, do you think that's accomplishable?
Repeat the question.
Can we just prohibit plats, you know, tandem plats, you know, where you have, you know, what are two rear lot lines currently backing up to each other like you see all over the place here? Can we just prohibit those entirely, where you cannot combine those?
I think probably you could. I mean, you under the statutes, you can adopt reasonable rules and regulations with respect to platting. And so it's just a question of whether or not that's a reasonable rule or regulation. So.
And if somebody has a valid argument for one that just doesn't fit inside the pretty box, we can always give a variance, right?
Well, we'd have to authorize a variance
Okay.
in the code.
In the statute.
In the code, but I mean, we'd want to make sure that we have objective standards. The more objective, the better, so that you can't be accused of just, in layman terms, willy-nilly granting variances. In legal terms, being arbitrary and capricious. When you're
Like willy-nilly.
yeah, willy-nilly is a lot easier to understand than arbitrary and capricious.
Okay.
I think what Michael proposes makes sense. I think it makes sense for all of us to kind of noodle over it again. I remember this issue coming up over, over a year ago, Jordan. So it's good that you brought it back up. But having not seen this in action, now that you're showing it to me, it's making more sense to me. I get why we're feeling like there's a need here.
Well, let's do this. Let's ask staff, Charlie, we can go away to come up with some language that would prohibit platting lots with a shared adjacent, rear adjacent line. And then we can discuss it. I honestly was looking at this as a fencing issue, a fencing and building issue. But now that I think about it, it may just be as simple as if you want to build a garage, it has to be 30 feet back a curb, and you can have a garage in that other lot. It's just a lot that it's its own space, and it'll have to be a minimum of 1,500 square feet. I forget what our minimum size is. It 15 or 1,800? Does anybody remember on staff?
1,800.
Okay, so you got to have an 1,800 foot garage. That's what was frustrating people. So, because we do have a minimum size of the main house, and there has to have a main dwelling. But all right.
And I separately, I think it's probably worth maybe next time talking about whether we want to explore limitations on height of fence overall.
Okay. I do think from the pool standpoint, we've had a recommendation from our building official to consider a proposal for 48-inch. Keep the rest of it regarding see-through and ability that fits within the International Building Code, but raise that height to make it pool compliant. And I'm frankly good with that generally. Just my 2 cents on it. So let's go away. We'll come back and talk about how we can go about doing that. Y'all comfortable with that? Okay, we'll work with staff to come up with some language for y'all to see at our next meeting. All right, any further discussion on item number 4? All right, hearing none, we are, just a quick time check. Where am I? 7:58, almost 8 o'clock. So we've been at it a couple hours. So let's go ahead. That was, sorry, I said item number 4. It was actually item number 6 we were in. Am I? No.
No, 7.
7. That was 7. So let's head back to item number 5, discussion and possible action to elect a chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission. This is on there. I've talked to a couple of you about if you're interested in it. I've been doing this now. I honestly don't remember how long I've been doing it. So am open to other people who wanna breathe a little life into it. And that's why it's there. So if anybody's interested, I would love for someone who wants to serve as chair to step in and can take over this year. Mike, and talking with staff, we figured you're the newest guy. It may just have to fall to you. He's not laughing.
You're doing an incredible job. I don't think you want to let the rookie take over. I mean, come on, Jordan.
Guys, this is easy.
It's a big ask, a heavy lift.
It's easy. All right. Well, I'll ask outright. Does anybody want to be chair?
No, I've done it before. I don't want to do it again.
Amy got there first. She said, "I will only do this if I'm not chair." I think that was clear from the get-go for Amy.
I should have had that notarized.
I do recall it being said. We can't talk about it because it's not in it, but as we talk about a new member, we may need to go hire a chair out there. Maybe we can rob one from one of the other commissions. Be like, come on over. We got Yeti cups. It's great. All right.
Can we rewrite the code to go chairless? Just regular, everyone's a committee member?
I like a rotating chair. Y'all have to each pick a meeting and run it. I don't know. We can talk about it. Not in this meeting, but we do not currently have a planning and zoning member on the strike force. I had to drop out due to my mom's health, and I feel like that's still the situation. And Alex has resigned as well. So is there any, I can't talk about it, but please consider it. Feel free to tell me if you're interested in the strike force. It's fortunately not in the agenda. So there's that. Let's move on to, I mean, we could talk about number 8. That is, the update is Alex is no longer serving as a strike force commission. Well, before I move on, any other questions about 5? Does anybody want to nominate somebody else?
I will
Alright,
talk to people who've been on various councils and commissions before and see if anybody's interested. But if I say you have to serve as chair, they'll run away.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about 8. Do we have an update from the strike force? It would have been Alex, but can staff perhaps update us on what the status is?
Sure. So this item, basically, we were going to update the commission that, you had a strike force member officially appointed, and that was Alex Robinette. But now we know we're going to have to go through that process again. Wanted to let you know that your council liaisons were appointed. You now have Sarah Hudson as an additional liaison, and Gavin Massengill is still your liaison. The tree canopy management ordinance amendments, I believe all of it's been, I've slept since then, but most of your recommendations were approved. The one that was not was getting rid of the cedar elms, and so that was not approved, but everything else they approved. Wanted to let you all know that there is a rapid COVID-19 testing center that is going to be setting up in the Arise parking lot. That's our hospital zoning district. We've had conversations with them. We're really excited. It's the test that is very accurate, and you will have results in minutes, and it's a drive-through setup. So I think this area of the state is underserved with regard to rapid testing. So we're excited that they're coming to us. Oh, they also hire locally. And so they will hire about 2 to 3 employees. But I mean, we're excited that we get to, talk about hiring employees. Open meeting procedures, we continue. The governor decides when we'll be able to go back to, or when we are not able to no longer meet virtually. We are in conversations with the church to talk to them. We want to go look at their facilities, see if there's a possibility that we could meet there. And that way we would be able to house more people and socially distance. We've got the council chambers set up with sneeze guards, but we just don't think by the time you put a full commission or council and staff and then members of the public, we're going to be pretty close quarters in there. So we'll be looking to do that. And then finally on the driveways, wanted to let you know that it was the general practice in the past to have multiple driveways on the same street for different properties. And so that will be the determination of the building official going forward, that multiple driveways will be approved.
What does that mean?
So I think you all had, what is it, 5,000 Rollingwood. It was a circular drive. It was the first one that had come before Carrie, and she felt like the code was silent as to whether that would be allowed, multiple driveways, and therefore her interpretation was that it was prohibited. We did some more research and discovered that it has been a historical practice to allow that. And so going forward, if somebody applies with a plan that has multiple driveways on their lot, it will be approved.
So can you have as many as you want on a lot, or are you talking about circular driveways being approved? I'm confused.
There is no limit.
To the number of driveways.
Correct.
But is it the case that you cannot have driveways on a corner lot on both streets? You only get it on one, right?
Right. And that, yeah, that would, if they wanted to go to two different streets, that would come before planning and zoning.
I don't think the current code really says that though, does it? Or
Yes.
that was our struggle in the last one, was we're like, I don't see where it says you can only have driveways on a corner lot on one street. That's where, and sorry, I'm going off of my recollection. That's where I sort of struggled. So does council want us to look at that and clean up the code, or?
Wendy suggested it. They did not take formal action to have you all take that up. So that's why it's not as an official item.
Does staff want us to get in there and clean up code? Or are you guys feeling, I honestly would worry at my last recommendation of the code. I'm like, this doesn't say anything about when it talks about a corner lot, except that you can't start on one corner and transition to the other one. Although we just showed that. So that's about the only thing that sort of outright said you have to go to planning and zoning for. We had that discussion about, two circular driveways, one on one street, one on the other street. Is that gonna be a problem? And okay, well, I guess we could talk with Gavin and Sarah to see if they want us to explore that. And by all means, if staff needs us to clean up code to get better clarification, we can do that in the appropriate manner with notices. And the reason I asked, if they want us to do it, we got a notice. It's it's not we talk about it and it gets passed at the next council meeting type of thing. So.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. So no clarity on when we can all be back together in person. All right. Any questions from the commission for our staff for updates? All right, hearing none, we're going to discussion on scheduling and planning for future meeting dates and any agenda items. This is our standard item. If there are any items that you would wish to bring before the commission, it is as simple as shooting me an email and we will make sure it is included. That meeting will happen right after the council meeting, so a couple weeks from now, for our first Wednesdays of the month. Ashley, do you have the calendar handy, or is there a spot online we can look at it? We normally don't have a January meeting, y'all. We did this because we didn't do December, but we will have a February, March, April, May. Do we have June and July, Ashley?
I can't remember. And so if there is a plat or something, regardless of if, there's not a scheduled meeting necessarily, you'll meet anyways. So I think we can approach those as they come to it. They'll always, you'll have your first Wednesday date reserved.
We'll reserve them all. Our goal, just as a chair, is to try and give you all the summer when things are kind of quiet. They weren't quiet last summer, and we were able to dial in, which is easy enough. But under the assumption that at some point the state is going to allow or require us to be back in person, our general goal, y'all, is to make sure your travel time in that, especially that first one in August, when people are typically gone, that we'll try to avoid meetings during those times. All right. Any question about scheduling for 2021? Any question or items that you guys definitely want to have on the next meeting? All right, if any of those questions come up, by all means, send myself or any of city staff an email and we'll make sure to bring it up on the next agenda. All right, that concludes our agenda. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Motion
moved.
to adjourn.
All right, doing it by
Second.
voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, we stand adjourned at 8:11. So thank y'all.
Happy New Year, everyone. Good to see y'all.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Happy New Year. Thanks everybody for your time. We really do appreciate it.